In the United States, 80% of our plant-based protein comes from wheat. We don't eat beans. We don't eat beans. We don't eat many nuts. We don't eat many soy products. We eat wheat in the form of breads and things like that. And so, as we go to a more plant-based diet, the question is everybody going to all of a sudden start eating lentils and beans? Or are they just going to eat more really bad protein and wheat?
Sir, we Indians consume far lower quantity of protein in our daily diet. Along with that, there is another issue, which is the quality issue. Because we Indians primarily focus on plant-based protein on a regular basis. We take animal-based protein on a special occasion or a special scenario or a ceremonial issue. So what's your take on the quality of protein in plant versus animal source?
Sure. So protein quality is something that has been fairly widely studied, but frankly not very well understood. In the United States, it's not a very big issue because our animal to plant ratio is about 65-35, where in India it's probably 30.
It's heavily skewed, sir, towards the plant.
Yeah.
In animal also, it's more like a dairy. Yeah, 70% in the plant side.
Yeah. And so what we know is that in plants have protein for the sake of the plant. Plants have protein to make roots and stems and flowers and leaves, and those are pretty different than arms and legs and hearts and brains. And so the idea that you can eat a soybean and that's going to turn into a healthy brain is kind of a dumb concept. Basically, one of the reasons we use animals is to consume these plants and turn it into the right balance for human consumption. And so whether that's meats, not vegetarian, or whether it's milks or eggs or yogurts, or fish, they're all balancing it correctly. And what that means is they have a higher ratio of the 9 essential amino acids. Plants have a higher ratio of the 11 non-essential, and animals have a higher ratio of the 9 essential. And they get them in the right balance. So you can do it with plants, but if you eat plant protein alone, you almost need 30% more total protein. So, so India has the worst of both worlds in that they have a very low protein diet and they have a high vegetarian diet. So they have low quantity and low quality at the same time.
Low quality,
and that's one of the things we're kind of doing in the United States is that there's this narrative that we need a more plant-based diet. And so what we know is in the United States, vegetarians typically have about 65 grams per day, so a little higher than India, but still very low, very near the RDA, and they're lowering quality at the same time. So, that's one of the big fears we have about this whole plant-based narrative is people are going to lower quantity and quality at the same time. If you eat a plant-based diet, you have to eat a lot more calories to get the same amount of protein or amino acids. And that then leads to obesity with low muscle mass, which is, again, that's where India kind of is, and that's where the United States is sort of going. We're just sort of at different stages of the same problem. But anyway, the protein quality, we know that all animal proteins have higher quality because they have a better ratio of the essential amino acids. And there are 3 amino acids that always stand out. There's lysine, methionine, and leucine. Those 3 are keys to evaluating diets. And plants are typically low in them. And the worst plant really on the planet is wheat. And in the United States, 80% of our plant-based protein comes from wheat. We don't eat beans. We don't eat beans. We don't eat many nuts. We don't eat many soy products. We eat wheat in the form of breads and things like that. And so, as we go to a more plant-based diet, the question is everybody going to all of a sudden start eating lentils and beans? Or are they just going to eat more really bad protein in wheat? And that's, that's a worldwide problem. As wheat has become a dominant carbohydrate worldwide, diabetes has increased worldwide. Obesity, diabetes have increased. And there's a lot of reason to believe that it's wheat-based.
Sir, for the same reason, I would like to know about the bioavailability, like how easily it is absorbed and how readily it is absorbed. Like let's say there is a 30 grams of plant protein and an equivalent 30 gram of animal protein. What's the difference in the bioavailability of these two proteins?
Great question. So again, one has to look at the form. So if you're looking at an isolated soy protein, a powder, the digestibility is above 90%. So it's pretty easily digested. But if you're looking something like wheat flour or a whole grain wheat, the digestibility is less than 70%. So if you're looking at a label where you've got 10 grams of wheat protein, there's actually only 7 there. And then you compound it with the fact that the wheat protein, the plants have more non-essential amino acids. The factor on the label is based on having 16% nitrogen, but it actually is worse than that. So if you look at whole wheat on the label and it says it's 10 grams, digestibility there's only 7, and from an amino acid standpoint, it probably drops another 20% or so. So there may be as little as 5 grams, even though it says there's 10.
So for vegetarians and vegans, there is a really interesting concept called complementing proteins. Like for example, cereals or legumes. There is a deficiency of particular amino acid in cereal and another deficiency for legumes. When you combine the both, it becomes a whole protein content. So what's your take on this complementary protein prescription?
Yeah, exactly. So complementary protein is a great example. But the best example of complementary protein is mixing a plant and an animal protein. So, for example, wheat is very deficient in that amino acid called lysine. So you can mix a wheat cereal with cow's milk, which is very rich in lysine. Okay, so you can take 4 grams of wheat protein and mix it with 6 grams of milk protein, and it's now a complementary 10-gram amount, okay? But if you did the same thing with soy protein, it takes almost 16 grams. It takes almost 30 ounces of soy. So it takes, where 6 ounces of dairy milk will complement that protein, the wheat protein, it takes 30 ounces of soy to complement it. So you can do it, but it always takes a lot more total protein and a lot more total calories if you do it plant and plant. So you can do it, but it always takes more calories and more total protein.
So according to your research, what are the different factors that determine the protein absorption in our body? Let's say someone consumes a raw protein or a cooked form of protein or a fried form of protein. So what are the differences in the protein absorption for such content?
Yeah, so the major effect of bioavailability is fiber. And so animal proteins don't have fiber, and they don't have dietary fiber, so only plants do. So in a plant, around 40% of the protein is attached to the cell wall and fiber, and the body can't digest that very well. Okay, so it's not very bioavailability. So the first factor is fiber. The second factor is fat. So if you have a complex meal that contains fat in it, that will slow the rate that food leaves the stomach. So that will begin to slow digestion. So those are 2 of the biggest factors in digestibility, is the complexity of the meal and the fiber amount.
And so what about the cooking thing?
Oh yeah,
like
yeah.
If you cook for a longer time, there is a protein degradation.
Browning reactions, called Maillard reactions, that's an interaction between a carbohydrate and a nitrogen amino acid. So browning of bread reduces the availability of that amino acid. Browning of any kind of pastry, any kind of grain product. But also in meats, cooking meats where it browns, you're losing some amino acids on that surface because of what's called a Maillard reaction. In general, those tend to be surface things, so it's not a big deal. But there are some in cooking. As far as temperature cooking in general doesn't hurt amino acids. It will change the configuration of the protein, but it's going to be digested anyway, so that doesn't really matter. So cooking of an egg, clearly it changes the configuration of protein. It goes from a liquid to a solid, but it doesn't change the digestibility of it.
Sir, in one of your recent podcast outing, the host asked a really important question, a really intriguing question. This is the importance of rudimentary animals. Like there are really herbivore animals who consume plant-based product, but they are converting that plant into essential amino acids, which we really want, we humans. So why humans are deficient in this feature? Why we are not able to produce our own essential amino acids?
That's a great evolutionary question. So ruminant animals, cows, goats, etc., have the ability to take very fibrous material, and so where we can't digest the protein that's attached to fiber, that cow's stomach can do that. So they can capture all of that, plus the bacteria in their stomach will rebalance the amino acids. So they'll take a glycine molecule that's a non-essential, and they'll turn it into a tryptophan molecule, which is essential. And so there's that relationship. Why don't we have it? There are some evolutionary arguments that the appendix was once a cecum type of ruminant material, and that as humans developed and learned to eat proteins from animals, things that were much more nutrient dense, we lost the need for that. So that's an evolutionary argument. I don't know if it's actually true, but there's some arguments that we did once have that. A colleague of mine, Dr. Suzanne Devkota, and I ran an experiment a while back. I always wondered why people who are more vegetarian didn't show more protein deficiencies. And so we ran an animal study where we looked at that. And what we found is that the colon of the gut, of monogastric, can actually increase bacteria that make it look more like a cow's gut, and they can actually scavenge more nitrogen. So we were comparing diets with 15% of the weight coming from fiber versus 5%, and the animals that had the high fiber diet, actually their gut microbiome changed to look more like a cow. And they actually were able to get along on lower protein diets. So we think that's an interesting, it was published in Nature. We think it's an interesting discovery. And what we found was certain microbes, certain bugs in the intestine actually developed that are generally present in the rumen of a cow. Certain ones that actually can make amino acids. And so it's a pretty interesting finding, and it may help support why vegetarians get along as well as they do.
दोस्तों, ये वीडियो अगर आपको वैल्यूएबल लगा तो इसे लाइक कर अपने सारे दोस्तों से इसे शेयर कीजिएगा। इस चैनल को सब्सक्राइब तो आप कर ही लेंगे। चलिए मिलते हैं।